Welcome to the very first episode of Layover and Chill. For my first episode, I had to do something epic, and what's more epic than a movie 65 million years in the making? For this video, I wanted to do a quick review of the book, 5 stars, the movie, 5 stars, fill in some of the plot holes that the movie created, and point out some of the things that you might not have noticed. So let's dig in. Like fossils? Digging for fossils? Yeah. Jurassic Park was my favorite film growing up and my first movie-going experience. I saw it in the summer of '93, and back then we had to wait all the way till the fall of '94 before the VHS came out. When I finally got my hands on a copy, I watched it over and over. I had the toys, clothes, video games, and even the Jurassic Park lunchbox. And it also introduced me to the idea of being scared is fun. And I've loved horror movies ever since. You're probably thinking to yourself, Jurassic Park is not horror. But I saw this when I was 5, and to me, it definitely was. And the Michael Crichton novel it's based on is straight up horror sci-fi. And taught me that books could be scary.
Why do you have a copy of The Shining in your freezer?
Oh, I was reading it last night and I got scared, so...
But you're safe from it if it's in the freezer?
Well, safer. I never start reading The Shining without making sure we got plenty of room in the freezer.
I won't be doing a one-to-one comparison of the book and the movie, but will be going over the major scenes and character differences. Much like the Jurassic Park scientists using frog DNA, I'm going to use the book to fill in the gaps of the more poorly explained parts of the movie. I didn't care about dinosaurs as a kid other than Jurassic Park, and everything I know about them comes from these movies.
Verizon Wireless presents the Indominus Rex.
Oh, that is so terrible.
To me, this movie was never about dinosaurs, but unchecked technological advancement, and taking something that someone else created and pushing it forward to a place it was never meant to go. I've seen the narrative play out several times since I was a kid, and the most recent seems to be artificial intelligence. I'm not saying AI in and of itself is bad, but it was originally developed to help with coding, and now it's being used by everybody from plagiarists to terrorists. Although the dinosaurs are responsible for all of the kills, the greater threat was the lack of respect for genetic engineering and the other humans. Sort of how in The Walking Dead, the zombies present the omnipresent threat, but the real danger comes from the other survivors. In a strange example of art imitating life imitating art, the creation process behind this film mimicked several of its themes. The original plan was to use highly detailed models whenever they could get away with just showing a part of a dinosaur, such as its head. Whenever they needed to use a full-size dinosaur, the plan was to use stop-motion animation, similar to Wallace and Gromit or Jason and the Argonauts. CGI had become so advanced that it blew stop-motion animation out of the water, and the original animators felt that they were now out of a job.
We're out of a job. Don't you mean extinct?
Although the computers could draw highly realistic models, it struggled with making their movements realistic. The animators evolved and were now tasked with using motion capture robots similar to how they would have used their clay figures, and these robots sent a signal to the computer to show it how to draw the dinosaurs. Michael Crichton is incredibly talented at taking complex science and mathematics and making it interesting and digestible for us common folk. But one of his common criticisms that I share is that he sucks at making likable characters. Every character in the book is just a less likable version of their movie counterpart. Although I prefer that a lot of characters in the book have an edge to them and more of them are in danger, you just don't feel like there's any stakes because you don't care if they do die. Paleontologist Dr. Alan Grant is quite a bit more of a stuffed shirt in the book. His human qualities are so toned down that he's indifferent at best upon seeing his lifelong obsession in the flesh. He ends up becoming a hero towards the end, but throughout the majority of the book, he is more obsessed with making sure that the baby raptors who've gotten on the boat don't make it to the mainland than he is with keeping anyone else alive. And perhaps most egregiously, he leads an expedition into a raptor nest so he can observe their breeding even after 8 people have already been killed. Paleobotanist Dr. Ellie Sattler is relatively unchanged throughout both versions. Although she's not the one to restore the power in the book, she does use herself as human bait to lure the raptors animators away so that Grant can. The biggest difference I noticed is in the book, the men are extra creepy how they lust after her. In fact, the only reason Gennaro wasn't around for the main T-Rex attack is because he had stayed behind with Ellie and Harding trying to slide into those DMs. Mathematician Dr. Ian Malcolm is the standout role of this movie and franchise. But in the book, he's not fun and quirky, he's just a blowhard. He accurately predicts all of the faults of the park, but his delivery isn't in a playful tongue-in-cheek tone. It's hard to tell how much credit should go towards the screenwriters versus Jeff Goldblum, but I really can't picture any other actor who could pull this role off quite like he did. Malcolm ends up dying of his injuries in the book, but is somehow resurrected for the sequel. I haven't read it yet, but it's on my to-do list. Feel free to drop a comment if you know how they retconned it. John Hammond's a lovable old billionaire just trying to make a theme park out of dinosaurs. His only crime is dreaming too big and sparing a couple of expenses.
We spared no expense.
The novel version, though, is an evil, cynical old man who lies, cheats, and steals to get ahead. He speaks ill of everyone around him, including his own grandchildren, and is just an overall awful person. Richard Attenborough brought that cute, lovable old grandpa charm to the role, with the he doesn't know any better kind of vibe, like the little old man at the hospital getting creepy with the nurses, where the novel version is more of the let's skip that house trick-or-treating kind of vibe. It's safe to assume everyone prefers the movie version of this character, but I did like that the book went with the killed by his own creation trope. I don't think anyone was rooting for the Attenborough version to bite it. Pun definitely intended. But I wish this movie had upped the emotional stakes by killing off some of the characters that you do care about. Tim and Lex's roles are essentially reversed. Tim is now the older brother, who is both the dinosaur and computer expert, and Lex is his 7-year-old younger sister who does nothing but complain about being tired, hungry, and bored. She constantly puts the group in danger by narrating every thought that she has. Having 2 younger kids myself, I suppose it's realistic that she doesn't completely understand the threat that the dinosaurs pose, but man is she an annoying character. And I'm glad the movie toned this down. Ed Regis is the park's marketing director and John Hammond's right-hand man/goon. He has a fairly major role in the novel, but as many times as I had seen this movie, I couldn't recall hearing that name, seeing it in the credits, or in closed captioning. So I went to Google to see if I could find a fan version, and the Jeep driver from early in the film kept popping up over and over. Maybe that's Ed Regis and I just somehow missed it. So next I went to IMDb and nope, the Jeep driver isn't even a credited role. I had to keep scouring IMDb to find out that that's actually stunt coordinator Brian Smurs. Yo, Brian, what are you doing right now? I was just gonna get coffee. Put this hat on. Go drive that Jeep. Okay. For the purposes of this video though, we need an Ed Regis. So Brian Smurs, check that mailbox tomorrow for your residual check, cause you are now Ed Regis.
You did. You crazy son of a bitch, you did.
Any of the toxic traits that Gennaro has in the film come from the book version of Ed Regis. In addition to being a creep, he's also the coward that initially abandoned the kids when he ran away from the T-Rex. And instead of Gennaro being eaten off the toilet by Mama T-Rex, he's mauled and killed by baby T-Rex. Chief Engineer Ray Arnold doesn't have much of a role in either version, but he's pretty forgettable in the novel without that Samuel L. Jackson charisma. And he doesn't care nearly as much about butts.
Hold on to your butts.
Blood-sucking lawyer Donald Gennaro is a lot less blood-sucking this time around. He's still not a great dude, but most of his cowardly traits are actually put onto Ed Regis. Probably his biggest crime is when the Costa Rican government shows up and he pretends like he hasn't been on InGen's payroll since the beginning. Like he's just another guest that weekend along with the doctors and the kids. Game warden Robert Muldoon is a bit grouchier in the book and displays a greater contempt towards the animals. You could certainly forgive a guy for having a nip following a near-death experience, but he chugs whiskey after every raptor encounter and is straight up drunk towards the end of the book. Not to mention most of his co-workers refer to him as an alcoholic. In one scene, he even seriously threatens to use an electric shock stick on Gennaro. Veterinarian Dr. Jerry Harding doesn't have more than a couple of lines in either version, but in the book, he spends the second half tending to Malcolm's wounds and administering morphine as a vet to a human who dies.
Oh, boy, am I gonna get sued.
Geneticist Dr. Henry Wu is quite a bit more involved in the novel. He has knowledge of the park and computer systems and is intimately involved in the group decision making throughout. As brilliant a geneticist as he has very little knowledge of dinosaur or animal behavior, and as a result gets many people killed. Comically, he doesn't even know the names of most of the dinosaurs he's brought back to life. He isn't an inherently evil character, but when he dies, it's hard to feel much sympathy due to how recklessly he wielded genetic engineering. Second only to John Hammond, by far the biggest character change is that of Dennis Nedry. Everyone still refers to him as a fat, lazy slob, but he becomes more sympathetic when you get more background on his education and experience and the difficult situation that Hammond places him in. He's a brilliant computer programmer, and when he was originally hired by InGen, his only task was to create a large database for storing their DNA and a graphical user interface for interacting with it. As the project continued, he was eventually assigned with creating the entire computer system, including all of the automation. He was largely left in the dark about what Jurassic Park actually was, so it was difficult for him to design software when he didn't know what it was for. This led to even greater conflict with Hammond and Arnold. Since the scope of the project had completely changed, he asked for more money. Hammond and InGen threatened to sue and even went to his other clients saying he was difficult to work with and didn't respect deadlines, essentially blackmailing him into finishing the project at the original price. Only after this was Biosyn able to lure him away through corporate espionage. I'm not condoning Nedry's actions, they indirectly led to the death of 8 people, but I prefer how in the book he's less of a cartoonish villain and the line between good and evil is blurred a bit. He's quite the complex character in the book. His meeting with Dodgson doesn't take place in a Costa Rican cafe, but instead in the San Francisco airport. The location was specifically requested by Nedry, and he used Dodgson's name several times because he was actually wearing a wire. He wanted to make sure Biosyn didn't double-cross him. I always wondered what Nedry's plan was if he had made it to the dock. Was he just planning on getting on the boat and hoping that the phone stayed down long enough for him to get back to the mainland? Or was he gonna come back to the visitor center and try to make up some excuse of where he'd been and why all of his systems had failed? The book does explain he did plan on just handing the sample off to his contact on the boat and then making his way back. But as he continued to lose time getting lost in the park, he was gonna bail and try again the next day before he ran into the Dilophosaurus. Several notable scenes from the book didn't make it into the original film but were used in the sequels. These include the T-Rex river chase, the aviary, the little girl being attacked by compies on the beach, Hammond being attacked and killed by compies, dinosaurs on the boat, Baby Rex, and the T-Rex waterfall attack. There was some other scenes that didn't make it into the screenplay, such as the compies eating the baby. I don't think anybody was upset that that got cut. The only missing scene that hurt the overall final product was the motion sensor tracking scene. It's a suspenseful scene where Malcolm proves the flaws in the motion sensor tracking system. They were originally programmed to locate and count all the known dinosaurs on the island. He had them change the search parameters to locate and count any dinosaur on the island, and the numbers skyrocketed, proving that the dinosaurs were breeding and the park had no control over them. The biggest scene that wasn't in the book that they added for the movie was the T-Rex Jeep chase. What an incredible sequence, and I quote it all the time.
Must go faster.
In my opinion, the most chilling scene in both versions is what happens in the maintenance shed with Arnold. In the book, when he gets there, he realizes he has no light, so he uses his shoe to prop the door open and allow a small amount of sunlight in. He doesn't get further than a few feet down the catwalk when suddenly the light is obscured by an unknown entity. He turns around and sees it's one of the raptors that has opened the door the rest of the way with its nose. He runs, it chases him, it catches him, it eats him. Obviously it's scarier and more detailed than that, but I hadn't read the book in about 10 years, and I actually misremembered this scene even better in my opinion. I remembered that as Arnold made his way down the catwalk, suddenly he was plunged into darkness. He assumed that the shoe had just come out of the door, but after a few moments he could hear clicking down the stairs and smell the hot breath of an animal. Way better, I know, right? They had intended on filming the attack scene for the movie, but the set ended up being destroyed by a Hawaiian hurricane. So they went with the final version where both Ellie and the audience are completely unaware of what happened within the bunker until she encounters the raptor and Arnold's arm. One of the best scenes. But it might have been a happy little accident, because sometimes with monsters on screen, less is more, such as with Jaws 1, and how due to technical difficulties, Bruce got such little screen time, which actually made it scarier when it did appear. The most famous plot hole in all of Jurassic Park is when the T-Rex breaks through the main fence. She goes from standing on level ground to the main road, yet only a few moments later pushes the Explorer off over a 50-foot embankment. I've never really gotten hung up over continuity errors like this, but this scene causes heartburn for a lot of people. Even Spielberg admits that this scene could be shot a lot more logically, but at the expense of entertainment and increased production costs. From an earlier conversation, we know that Jurassic Park employs many physical security features.
The full 50 miles of perimeter fence are in place.
And the concrete moats and the motion sensor tracking systems. Donald, dear boy, relax.
It's likely that just adjacent to the T-Rex viewing area is where those moats and barriers begin. It'd make a far less interesting viewing experience if you had to look 50 feet down upon the T-Rex. Because of this, park designers built a small feeding area plateau where the goat is to direct the T-Rex up towards the fence where the guests could see her. And just a few feet in either direction is where the drop-off begins and where the explorer got pushed. The layout of the park is perhaps the most confusing part of this film, and the only map that we are given doesn't coincide with any of the events of the movie. The best look that we get of the layout of the park is on Nedry's computer screen when the fences begin to fail. I slowed down the playback and plotted where the dinosaurs are supposed to be according to Nedry's map. This is problematic though, because both the park tour and Nedry's trek to the East Dock could not have happened based on how this map is laid out. Fortunately though, the book explains that there were several issues with the original layout of the park, such as the raptors being able to escape out of their original paddock. You likely assume that the opening scene was the raptors being moved from their breeding area to their paddock, but it was actually them being moved from the original paddock to their special enclosure. The map on Nedry's computer is just outdated and is one of the many bugs he's yet to address. I found a fan-made version of the park map online and tweaked it a little bit. I added where the dinosaur paddock should be based on the events of the film, and then the other species that weren't depicted, I just placed them in logical locations. Equipped with this new map, we can now accurately track all of the movements within the perimeter fence and overlay all the events of the film onto it. Nedry was headed towards the East Dock when he got turned around and encountered the Dilophosaurus. There's a few possible scenarios that led to this. Nedry might have taken a wrong turn the moment he entered the main park. He might have gotten so turned around that at some point he ended up back towards the north side of the park. In the 5 minutes the fences were down, an extra sporty Dilophosaurus made it all the way from the north to the south side of the park. Or the Dilophosaurus paddock was just to the south of the park and not to the north as depicted on his computer.
Gotcha, bitch!
That seems the most logical to me and lines up with our other map. Outside of the perimeter fence is the Safari Lodge, the Visitor Center, the Maintenance Shed, and the Emergency Bunker. These are all within relative walking distance of each other because Arnold mentioned that just on the other side of the compound, and he felt comfortable making the trek without a Jeep. The Safari Lodge wasn't included in the film, which is too bad because a lot of cool scenes took place there, but it's obviously implied that the guests stayed somewhere for the weekend. One final detail I added was the presence of the main dock to the north side of the island. Nedry traveled to the East Dock to meet his biosyn contact, and in the book it describes this isn't the main dock, and they specifically chose this location to try to be more discreet. Nowhere is the location of the main dock described, so I chose the north side of the island as it's closest to the mainland, and that made the most sense to me. I always thought that Tim shouldn't have gotten shocked here as he wasn't in contact with the ground. This is how birds can sit on electrical wires, but if a squirrel climbs from a pole to a wire, it gets electrocuted. Perhaps those vertical wires aren't support wires but are grounding wires installed to deter a dinosaur from jumping onto and climbing over the fence. This is ineffective CPR, but Tim didn't need CPR. Grant's a PhD, not an MD, so due to the stress of the situation, he didn't realize Tim was still breathing with a pulse. There were never just 3 raptors, but an unknown amount of adult raptors running around the island, and only 3 that the park staff were ever aware of. Muldoon describes that they bred 8 originally, but a big one came in and killed all but 2 of the others. That would leave us with 3 raptors. During the opening scene with the attack on the worker, they fire multiple shots into the raptor, clearly killing it, so we should only have 2 left. Tim and Lex lock one in the freezer, so there should only be 1 that's unaccounted for. But during the climax, we're back to 2. The film never specifies which paddock Grant and the kids found the eggs in, but these are Velociraptor eggs. Before being moved to their special enclosure, they could slip through the fences and basically move freely throughout the park. So their breeding went undetected, and the staff never had an accurate number of how many raptors were on the island. While I was editing this video, I started to punch a hole in my own theory. What if the raptor that was shot and killed in the beginning was actually a 4th raptor? But if you go back and listen to what Muldoon actually says,
We bred 8 originally, but when she came in, she took over the pride and killed all the 2 of the others. That's why we have to feed them like this. She had them all attacking the fences when the feeders came.
The opening sequence takes place after the big one comes in and kills all but 2 of the others. 3 raptors. You could make the argument that they just bred more raptors, but the whole reason the experts were brought to the island was in response to the initial attack, so logically it's only a few days or weeks later. So the movie unintentionally gets it correct that at least one of the wild raptors joins the other 2 during the finale. The T-Rex save in the end is super corny and everyone should have been able to hear and feel her coming, but I can at least explain how she got into the building. Several shots throughout the movie show that the western wall of the visitor center isn't enclosed and is just covered by plastic sheeting. It's likely that this is so contractors can move lifts and other heavy equipment in and out of the building easier, but it is silly that they're doing finish work while the exterior wall is still open. It's not a major plot point in either story, but in the book, the dinosaur toxicity is solved. Several of the herbivores needed to swallow small rocks to aid in digestion, and when doing so, accidentally consumed some West Indian lilac. It would slowly poison them over the course of approximately 6 weeks before they would regurgitate it along with the old rock before going to find a new rock. Other than sharing my love of Jurassic Park, my favorite part about making this video was all the new things I found while I was grabbing content. Just outside of the T-Rex paddock is a sign that says no yelling, no flash photography, and no feeding. I had to laugh at this because I couldn't decide which is more ridiculous, that the sign's telling you not to feed the goat or the T-Rex. As if you'd be traveling around with hay or lamb chops.
What's the matter, kid? You never had lamb chops?
Nedry's closed-circuit television is just a playback of a video file. Tyrannosaurus and Stegosaurus are spelled wrong. The ceiling grid here is made up of literal A, T, C's, and G's, which are the 4 components of DNA and are casting the light down upon the raptor. The stunt woman wasn't supposed to look up here, so when she did, they had to CGI Lex's face on. That's why it looks so weird. When Hammond tells Arnold to call Nedry's people in Cambridge, I always just assumed that was the University of Cambridge in England. It finally dawned on me that that's probably MIT or Harvard in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Pretty embarrassing considering I grew up 70 miles north of there. Go Sox! Tim and Lex are able to trap the raptor in the freezer because the door was wide open. With the power being out, the ice cream started to melt, and so Hammond started eating it and just never bothered to close the door. The software that runs Jurassic Park is called Nedryland JP. What a legend. I always wondered what Malcolm's injury from the T-Rex was because he had to apply a tourniquet, yet it doesn't show him get bit or scratched. The real answer is wild. When the T-Rex breaks through the front of the bathroom, Malcolm is riding his nose and gets yeeted off.
That is one big pile of shit.
When Nedry starts the White Rabbit object program on his computer, he clicks the mouse in such a weird way. I thought it was a quirky character trait, but he's starting a timer on his watch at the same time as he's starting the program. I was a fire inspector in a former life, and these types of panels are completely real. The greater the amperage of a circuit, the greater the force required to reset a breaker. And in some power-hungry buildings, such as hospitals and dinosaur theme parks, the force required is so great that no human could close the circuit without a priming handle. As I was gathering footage for this video, it occurred to me that there's still a raptor locked in the freezer. Now, if the power was completely restored, it likely froze to death, but what if that's one of the systems that Lex didn't reset? Isla Nublar has been destroyed, and all remaining survivors have fled. They call the Costa Rican government for help, and you know when they show up, it would be open season on dinosaurs. Rexy, no! But in the movie, they don't call the Costa Rican government. The InGen investors, in a desperate attempt to minimize any losses, would immediately bring in their insurance adjusters and salvage company. They would quickly get to work both assessing the damage and itemizing any remaining asset. All the while completely unaware that Tim and Lex had locked a raptor in the freezer. He's just been in there chilling. See what I did there? And munching on steaks and other tasty treats until the freezer door is opened and he adjusts the adjuster. Oh, dad jokes for days. My only major criticism of the film is the lighthearted, family-friendly tone it took in comparison to the book. This became especially true when I found out that James Cameron almost directed this. He would have given it the darker, edgier tone that this story deserves. A missed opportunity lost to history.
You've got a hard-on for Cameron.
Spielberg was simultaneously filming Schindler's List during the creation of Jurassic Park, and this movie became his escape from the depressing nature of Schindler's List, which is likely one of the reasons why he went in the more family-friendly direction. So there you have it, my all-time favorite film, but one of my least favorite franchises. Each sequel that comes out further tarnishes this great film. I see all the new sequels as they come out, hoping they'll be the one to turn it around, but other than a little bit of nostalgia, these movies are rough to get through. If you liked this video, do me a favor and comment, like, and subscribe. I'm a full-time pilot, husband, and father, and a very part-time content creator, so you won't be bombarded with constant updates. If you didn't like this video, I also ask that you comment, like, and subscribe. Just do me a favor, if you're gonna be devastating, make me laugh while you're doing it. Until next time, this has been Layover and Chill.